Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us today. I have a very special guest with us today, Leah Heise. Leah has joined us. She is the CEO of Gemini Twin Consulting. The naming convention is a story in itself. But Leah is a lawyer, an attorney by training, and does consulting in pretty much every aspect of cannabis. But how she came to cannabis is as interesting as what she does in cannabis. So Leah, welcome to our show, and take a minute to chat with us and share with us your personal story and how you ended up in the cannabis space, because I think that's a pretty compelling story.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here. What brought me to cannabis was a medical condition. Like many people in the industry, I found the plant through an illness. What I have is something called chronic pancreatitis. At the time I was diagnosed, it was 2001, and I was prosecuting for the federal government on the conservation side for marine mammals and commercial fisheries. And I was actually interviewing with John McCain to be the chief counsel for the Ocean Subcommittee in the Senate Finance Committee. And I was hospitalized and told at that time that I would never be able to work again, and that I needed to go home and take care of my then 18-month-old twins and wait 5 years, because that was the life expectancy they gave me at the time. Put me on very high doses of opiate pain medication in a nice little combo cocktail with Xanax. So, lovely cocktail to be on. Didn't die, obviously, had lots of hospitalizations. And then in 2013, one of my doctors said to me, maybe you should try cannabis. It will reduce inflammation, we believe. We didn't know a lot at that point, but thankfully this was an Israeli doctor. And he said that he thought it would help with both the pain and the inflammation. And what it has done is not only allowed me to have a career again, but I haven't been hospitalized with acute pancreatitis since 2016, which I was on average every 6 to 8 weeks being hospitalized with pancreatitis. So an absolute game changer for me, gave me the ability to have a career and live a full life again.
Wow. So cannabis is more than just a business for you.
Yep. It was a real game changer. I believe strongly in the plant. I don't necessarily believe it's a cure for everything, but I think it's something to have in your toolbox, and that people should at least try to go towards natural, more holistic plant type medicine, even if they're using it in combination with pharmaceuticals like chemotherapy or other types of autoimmune disorders like metformins and things like that, methotrexate. Like, I think that there's ways to use them synergetically together, and if you can just do plant medicine, even better.
Well, it's, diving into the plant and medicine side of this, I think that's one of the more exciting areas that when I first was introduced to the cannabis space, was the combo therapies. For example, why throw? We like, in our American healthcare system, like to take a flamethrower and throw it at a problem. So instead of 5 milligrams of Percocet, we overprescribe, and that's been our pattern as a healthcare system. And the idea to say, hey, let's cut the opioid in a third and supplement it with something else that's not as addictive. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that methodology. We're seeing a lot of that in development of cannabinoid therapies, not in the U.S., internationally, but that's a pretty exciting movement to me. I mean, I met a meat researcher. It's totally off topic, but it's interesting and relevant. Who was developing a combo drug of cannabis and red unrefined opium, because unrefined opium is less addictive, but it also has a lot of the same anesthetic effects. So I think there's a lot of neat, promising areas in that, and that's what gets me excited in the cannabis and medicine space.
I do too. I think once we get to the land of rescheduling, descheduling, whatever happens, what we're going to be able to do with medicine and cannabis is going to be dramatic. So that rescheduling, descheduling, whatever happens, is not only vital to the survival of the industry itself, but also really can help us innovate and cure things that maybe couldn't have been cured in the past.
Yeah, there's a lot of diseases out there that cannabinoid therapy is absolutely appropriate for, and research has been hamstrung because it's a scheduled drug. So So help us understand the work you do in cannabis, coming from, obviously your personal journey, your professional journey. It's fascinating to hear about your professional, work as an attorney. Help us understand what you do in cannabis now and how you help some of these international companies that engage with you,
Sure.
help them strategize on how to grow.
Sure. So I have a couple of different arms of what I do. I have my own personal consulting company, Gemini Twin Consulting, and then I'm also a consultant advisor to a large scale management consulting company called Kearney. And they are a mainstream company that came into cannabis last April. And they help top tier MSOs do everything from end-to-end transformations, including like restructuring debt, restructuring the company, reorganizing, doing demand planning, figure out ways where you can increase EBITDA rapidly, where's the low hanging fruit, and then where's the sort of long-term professionalization. And so I work with Kearney on that type of things. And then with my own consulting company, I do everything from application writing to helping companies get built for success. One of the things that we've done in the cannabis industry, and in my past, I've built 2 multi-state operators and been part of the teams to take them public. So rapid growth, dramatic rapid growth in the last.
You've been there and done that personally, not just coming as a consultant. You actually rolled up your sleeves and toiled in the dirt.
Yep, and build these, literally toiled in the dirt. Yep, and help build these companies. But because we were building with a mindset of rapid scale, there weren't a lot of infrastructures put in, and I'm seeing this sort of industry-wide. We need more professionalization inside of the way that we work. We need to really be looking at what is the customer experience. Are the customers satisfied? How are we bringing customers into our stores? Are we selling them the products that they want to even be sold? And how is that customer journey? Can they purchase online? Can it be delivered? And I do a lot of consulting around setting up the infrastructure to support the customer journey, as well as to decide how many employees you should have, what's your scale plan, do you have a strategic plan? And then even things as basic as governance, because I'm finding that a lot of companies didn't set themselves up for success because they got a license and the goal was to get to market as quickly as possible. Of course, you want to get to cash flowing as quickly as possible, but if you don't have things as basic as naming protocols for your files, you're not going to be able to find things, and then you're going to create a workforce who doesn't know where to find anything, doesn't truly understand their roles and responsibilities and what their jobs are, or even whether or not they're allowed to make a decision. And they spend way more time. It's a real productivity suck to not have some of these just very basic things, like who is responsible for making a decision. So that's a lot of the work that I do. And it's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of organization. I found that as companies, as some of these MSOs have grown so rapidly and done acquisitions, obviously, the integration of those acquisitions is lacking. And the purpose of the acquisitions is so you can scale together. So how do you reconcile that? I mean, that's some of the challenge I think MSOs are having.
That is one of the biggest challenges, I think, with MSOs is it was, we were on this big race for footprint, right? It was equivalent to a monopoly game. We were just going to pick up as many states as possible. But when then you got to the situation where every single state is its own regulated market, they may have a different seed to sale required platform than they have in another state. And how do you bring that infrastructure together in terms of systems? And what's happened in a lot of them is they've just left the systems the same. So there is no real ability on the corporate level to sit back and say, okay, let's come up with a pricing and promo strategy, because market to market, you might have garbage for data. Yeah. So those types of things need to be fixed. And normally either myself or Kearney, depending on which firm is coming in, will come in and we'll just do a needs assessment. And we just look to see what are your big pain points. And there's lots of pain points in every company, both in the cannabis industry and otherwise. And where's the low-hanging fruit that we can solve for right away? And then if you want to build a long-term strategic plan, let's talk about that as well. What can you tackle quarter by quarter to become more holistic as a company? Because you're not going to flip a switch overnight. These companies are too big. Now, if you're an early stage company and I'm helping you build from scratch, and you're willing to put some time and energy into actually coming up with governance, doing a correct structure, things like that, then you're a little bit set up better to scale, right? You can hit the ground running, but at least you have those pillars and you understand how everybody's going to be working.
I would say that's probably one of the bigger challenges we have as a service provider in this space, is to find accurate and consistent data.
Oh.
And it's just because it's really hard to do any planning whatsoever. From our perspective in the call center, in the contact center, customer service space, we're very, very data rich because we're talking to people, we're gathering data. Mm-hmm. In a typical, these are practices that have been in play for 20, 30, 40 years that have been in the space. We get into these companies, these larger companies, and they're not gathering data, they're gathering it inconsistently. So you're not able to get an accurate picture of how the business is doing, of what the customer journey is like, what the challenges in the customer journey are. So we end up spending a lot of our time in an early engagement, just getting our arms around the data, to normalize the data so we can get some insights, because we come in with absolute blinders on, and just getting some insights is really the important part of what we do.
Yeah, I think data is king right now in the cannabis industry. We have such a lack of data, and not that we don't have data providers, we do, and we do have sources of data. But if you as a company haven't set up, how do you want to name the data? How do you want to store the data?
Who has access to the data?
Who has access? Exactly. And sometimes you'll go into a company and one store is naming all rosin as extracts, but they're also including it as a concentrate and something else. So like the labeling and naming conventions are off. So you can't get an apples to apples comparison, even though two stores may be selling the same exact thing. The data isn't named appropriately for you to be able to get any insight. And part of it is going back and just creating all of those protocols and saying, okay, we have this data, but let's get you real data. Let's make sure it's kind of pure and you can trust it. A lot of times when I'm talking to clients, they're like, oh, well, we don't really have any data. And it's not that they don't have data, it's that they don't trust the data.
Right. It's accurate and consistent.
That's right.
It's and so many people, there's a lot of issues around data structure, access, and we spend a lot more time than we probably want to, helping our clients normalize that data and get consistent data.
But it's good that you're doing it because they absolutely need it. Data is king. I mean, you really can do like a 3-point bump on EBITDA just by getting an idea of whether or not the amount of SKUs you're selling is too long. Like which ones
the deep dive analysis you can do when you have accurate data is mind-boggling. And I think most companies understand, most MSOs understand intuitively, but it's not until we get in, and I'm sure you're finding the same thing. When you get engaged with the company, start to dive in, they realize what a mess it is.
Yeah.
And we're trying to be smarter about it. And trying to identify those pain points earlier on in our engagement, because we took a lot for granted when we first got into this space 7 years ago. We assumed these are big companies, they're multi-billion-dollar companies. They must have their arms around data.
I mean, imagine that this is an industry really it's just not very old. And for the size that it is, to get to where it is right now, you kind of had to skip over some of the steps.
No question. No question. No question. That's the biggest issue with the industry is everybody was the race to scale, the race for footprint, the geographic footprint. And that wasn't on their mind, best business practices. Now it's a flip. Everybody's talking about cost.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about how do we lower our costs, and because we don't have unlimited capital all of a sudden like we did in the early days, and people just writing checks left and right because everybody wanted a piece of it, right?
Yep.
So help us understand value and cost and how you advise companies to look at that equation, because it's this race to the bottom I see right now in terms of just trying to save on costs.
It is a race to the bottom, and sometimes I'll see these press releases of so and so is decided they're going to eliminate 30% of their workforce or whatever. And I wish I could be inside of those companies or consulting with those companies to find out, is that the right decision? Because what tends to happen, and it depends on where the power sort of sits in these companies, but if it's a finance driven company, for example, they're going to go straight cost cutting across the board. So they're just going to start putting out, and this is a generalization, this is not all companies, but they'll say, okay, we're just going to cut staff 30% across the board because that's going to get us to where we're going to go. But that's not super strategic, because what is that? What are the 30% that you're cutting doing? And which roles are you cutting? Have you gone kind of department by department to understand how they can continue to operate without that personnel? So are you creating more operational efficiencies? What are you doing? And I think that you can create operational efficiencies and workflows and automations and end up with a stronger company with less employees without just saying, I'm doing 30% across the board.
Yeah, I would agree with the methodology that most companies are going through right now is just to do cost cutting without really understanding where to do cost cutting and where, because there are absolutely good reasons to do cost cutting. There's no question that bloat was built into a lot of these business models as they expanded. Yeah. But as we've discovered, having good business practices makes the ability to scale up and down with personnel a lot easier. And so what I'm hearing is you're better served as an organization to really focus on business practices first.
I agree.
Then to look at costs second, because it'll make more sense and probably be more effective.
And, it prevents things like unionization, right? Like a lot of the reasons why employees want to be unionized at this point is they don't feel appreciated. They don't have a path forward. There's no career progression. They don't have KPIs. They're not getting evaluations. They're not getting any real feedback. The turnover rates are insane. If you could dial in that employee experience well, I would think that the unionization would be less. I'm not saying like unionization is bad or good, but unionization is a significant cost to a company, especially a company that's not an MSO. If it's a single state operator or a single dispensary, the cost for unionization for attorneys alone can put you out of business.
Sure. Well, I think that's a symptom of many macro issues, including just the macro issue of unemployment rate. Yep. This is, my 30 years in business, my 30 plus years in business, this is the first time I've seen the equation the way it is. And I don't see it changing that much anytime soon. The employees definitely, we talk a lot in our business about the customer experience, but we're seeing more and more companies talk more and more about the employee experience. For the very reasons you're talking about, because what drives the customer experience is the employee experience.
And in cannabis, the employees are so passionate about what they do and why they're here, because they're really purpose driven about it, a substantial amount of them. So as a company, those are the ones I want to really develop. I always say that when your employees get quiet, that's when you need to start worrying. Yeah. Instead of the noise, people don't like the noisy employees. I want the employees.
I would agree with you. The passion is something that the industry needs to learn to harness, and pretty much every experience I've ever had at a dispensary and every experience I've had with our own employees, the passion for the plant is unique. And so as an employer, one of the things I talk about all the time is how do you talk to employees about being more than just hammering nails? How do you get an employee to feel like they're building a house? And I've never been more successful as an employer as with cannabis, because the employees are so passionate about the plant. They want to raise their hand and say, I want to be part of building the house. I don't want to just hammer nails. That's right. And when we listen to employees and we listen to that employee experience and that employee journey, guess what happens?
More customers.
Journey improves.
Dramatically. When your employees are happy, your sales are going to go up. I mean, it just is what it is. You're going to have, and on a corporate level, you're going to have more productivity, more efficiencies. People are going to be happy to be at their jobs. If they're unhappy, I guarantee you they're spending 50% of their time looking for other jobs.
Right.
You're paying them to do it.
And there's plenty of them out there also. It's not like there's a lack of other opportunities, which is why the turnover rates are so high.
Yep, because you can just hop away.
Right. And I always make the point whenever I go to a dispensary in any state, and I make friends with the bud tender, and I get to learn their personal story and, you know, what other dispensaries have they worked at, and without exception, all of them have worked in double digits. double digits, not 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, but more than 10.
Yeah.
And which is an opportunity for me as a, you know, looking for primary research data. You know, who did you like working for? Why? What? and that employee experience, I can tell you that, you know, nobody's going to get it all right. Nobody. No. But if they can get just a couple right, are going to stand out. And that's kind of the impression I get of the industry. Would you agree?
Oh, I completely agree. I think employees, the lack of good employee experience is part of that phenomenon we talked about not having clear business structure early on. So employees don't know what they're supposed to do. They can't find their stuff. They're unhappy with the level of mergers and acquisitions that have gone on. You see that happen a lot because you are with company X, it gets bought, and then you don't like company Y, and then you
systems change. You have to learn a new system. System's not accurate. And we found that in our world, we'll have an employee come in and they'll say, you know, when we do an exit interview, they said, it was just too hard for me to jump between the client system and this system and this. It was just too much. And so we've taken that feedback and tried to streamline the employee experience to make it easier. And guess what we saw? We saw a reduction in employee turnover. If you make the job easier, if you make the system and process easier, the turnover reduces. And I think that's the challenge that MSOs and cannabis companies are facing as well.
Oh, that is definitely a big challenge. Turnover is a big challenge. I do lots of labor analysis to figure out whether or not there is any career pathing. Are people set up for success inside of their in their roles? Do they know if they're an assistant manager of the inventory room for X period of time? Do they have an opportunity to go to GM? Like, where is their next path? Yeah.
And by the way, and I think everybody would agree that's an employer, when people leave and you do accurate exit interviews, it's never about money. It's never about comp. And what I saw early on in the business, not seeing it as much now, we're in cost cutting mode, but it was a race to get experienced labor, people just upping the rates. We're not seeing that now. We're seeing the opposite. Yeah.
Definitely seeing.
Companies tend to pay more than they have to. If they had better structure, better processes, you wouldn't have to pay as much.
That's right. If the employees understood it, I mean, basic things, have an employee handbook. Make sure when you are bringing an employee on, there's actual onboarding. And during that onboarding, don't just make it with the HR person. Make sure that there's a system where they connect to other people in the company, including their managers, because I've seen some companies where they're onboarding employees and the manager doesn't even know they're coming in. And in fact, the manager who's going to be supervising them never even interviewed them. So wow. I don't know how that can be successful if you don't even know the person that you're going to be ultimately working for. So there's a lot of opportunity to really refine that employee experience, and it's not that difficult.
So what I'm hearing is you really roll up your sleeves.
I do.
You and your partner at Kearney really roll up your sleeves to figure out and how to structure a better operating business.
Mm-hmm. And every company is different. They have different values. They have different goals. They have different personalities, so to speak. The company itself has its own personality. And you have to figure out how to work within what the vision of the founders is and that personality to bring forth a holistic company. But we really are going to have to start maturing as an industry if we want to survive. It is tough to be in cannabis, period. Right now, it's really hard. to survive.
I don't disagree with you at all. And every discussion I have in this space is the same. It's like, gosh, they're all crying in the milk. But I think that the crux of the matter is better business processes is really the key to helping improve. And that's really what you help people, and what Cannabis BPO does. We're really preaching from the same hymn book.
100%. And think about, like Cannabis BPO, right? Think about outsourcing. You don't need to do everything inside of a company. It doesn't make any sense. No other company on the planet does every single thing the way that we do it in cannabis. We decide we're going to build our own data systems. We're going to have our own call centers. We're going to, we do everything. We don't have to do everything. And the other big thing that I see, which is a problem, is in staffing inside of these companies. Oftentimes they are staffing positions that are really projects.
Yeah.
So really think about, if a manager or someone comes to you as an HR person or someone, CEO, whoever, and says, I need 5 new people because I've got to get this done. Okay, well, how long does X take? Is it really just fixing a problem? Or is this a long-term position that needs to go on? Because what happens is these people come in, they do a great job. They're in like 6-7 months, and then there is no more job because they just got rid of it because they did their job. Right.
Well, that's what a good consulting firm should do, is to eliminate jobs by streamlining processes.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Leah, this has been fascinating on so many levels. Hearing your personal story and hearing how the industry is maturing, in the sense that the larger consulting firms like Kearney are putting their foot, not their toes, their foot and their ankles and their knees in the water and diving in deep, because I think the industry needs these types of expertise. So I'm thrilled to hear these developments, and I'm thrilled to have you on our show and hear your story, and love to have you back anytime. And thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan. It's always nice to talk to you.
Great.